Welcome to the Return to Roots Mil2Vet podcast, your guide through the journey from military to veterans in the community. This podcast is dedicated to service members, veterans, and their families. Get ready for inspirational stories and experiences generously shared by our amazing guests. Stand by for the sound of freedom. Before we dive into today's episode, we want to remind you of two essential resources, the 988 National Hotline for Mental Health Support and the MYTT 365 app available at mil2vet.com. Both are valuable tools to assist you in your transition journey. Now let's get to the show.
Return to Roots podcast. Welcome to today's show. We will be bringing you today Michelle Black. She is the author of the book called Sacrifice. She's a Gold Star recipient. Her and her family unfortunately had to go through that process, but she's willing to come to the show and share her experiences so that it brings awareness to everyone around us. Without further ado, Michelle Black, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, my name is Michelle Black, and I am the surviving spouse of Staff Sergeant Brian Black. He was a Green Beret who was killed in an ambush in 2017.
What have you done from then to now?
I have written a book. I do a lot of speaking engagements and work with some nonprofits, and I'm in the process of setting up my own nonprofit.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. What is your book titled?
It is titled Sacrifice, a Gold Star Widow's Fight for the Truth. And I actually have it in hardback, and I have a paperback copy as well. So,
Yeah, I got the opportunity to digest that book recently, and it's definitely, I felt hurt while I was reading it, and I found myself like breaking down, kind of digesting some of it, and especially when the whole entire part where you were finding out and you had that feeling, and that's like some of the things that was always on the back of my head, being in theater or deployed. It was just kind of always in the back of my head, like, man, like one thing could lead to another, and then I'm not hearing, just to hear from it. It really hit me in the heart. Like, I just thought of my kids and my wife and all that stuff. So, thank you for writing that book.
absolutely. And that was a part, that first chapter, where I thought, is this something I should be completely honest about? Because we're soft served that information so often, right? We kind of gloss over it because nobody wants to actually have to digest the reality of it. But when we look at war, we look at everything that comes with serving in the military. I mean, we have to be able to look at that realistically and digest it. And so for me, it was excruciating to write. But at the same time, it seems so important, not just for our military families to read, but also for civilians to read and say, okay, this is the reality of what we're sending our men and women into.
With you having to go through that experience, how were you able to navigate the difficult waters before, during, and after that eventually inspired you to write this book?
Oh, that's that's a complicated question. I don't know how I was capable to, as far as doing what I did. Sometimes I don't know how I had the fortitude to do it. Honestly, I think when you're in the moment, you're being driven almost, there's a mixture of, I think the first year after you lose your spouse, where you're going on that shock, and that you're not quite, reality hasn't fully set in. And with the complexity of the attack, the ambush, the aftermath, and everything that came with that, So when you look at, not just Brian and his team being ambushed, but them being wrongly blamed, an ISIS propaganda video coming out that my kids saw. So, there were multiple facets that kind of just put me into it put this drive inside of me that helped me to push past everything. I think when we experience injustice on a certain level as Americans, we have it built into us that we have to get justice no matter the cost to us. And I think that is what pushed me ahead every single day. There was never, I'm going to try and write this. It was, I am going to write this. There will be a book and the world will know the truth. And I don't care what that costs me or what that looks like, if that means I don't sleep for the next 5 years. So I think that's all it was that level of injustice mixed with that level of loss. It's like you have to write something just to be able to find peace.
Yeah, I really am glad you mentioned that, because putting things down on paper for us can really help us digest what's actually happening, what's fictional, what's reality, and kind of helps us dissect every single layer of the onion. And one of the things that is super healthy is actually just writing it down, what your feelings, write the vulgar stuff, write what you're feeling in the raw moment. And in some hard times, sometimes that can help you digest that. And not everybody's the same, hey, writing doesn't work for everyone, but for some of us that does. And sometimes just maybe even sitting down and talking to yourself in a recording or talking to somebody else and just getting it all out off of your chest and going back through it and like, wow, in the moment I remember things like this, but now thinking about it, it felt like this, then you could further digest and stuff. So I like, it's an honor just to sit here and hear you, because you not only did that for yourself, but you did it for the rest of the team members that survived and your own children. And you took on not only yours, but you also took on theirs by having to write that all down.
Yeah. And I think after watching them start being kind of laid out to dry and then scapegoated and all of that, and realizing that they're now looking at possible 15-6s and just basically everything they didn't deserve. And I finally thought, I'm going to interview them too. And when I did, that's when it changed everything, because it went from, this is my pain, and then seeing their pain. I mean, I'd seen it before, but to actually sit down with them one-on-one and each individual talk to them and see the way it affected them was so upsetting. And that's when I realized their level of loss is just as much as mine. It's different, but it's just as great. Not to mention the fact that they were on the ground and they feel this level of responsibility that I don't have to deal with. So for me, yeah, that's it. It completely changed.
Did you ever have thoughts prior to this? Were you prepared to write a book beforehand, or was this something that, because everything that transpired, it gave you the ability to move forward and put everything down, and allow you to thereafter get everything together to be able to write the book?
I had always wanted to write a book. I had tried and been pretty terrible at it. I don't think I would have actually ever gone through with writing a whole book. I might have written an article here or maybe a kid's book, but no, not a full 300 plus page book. I do enjoy writing, so I knew that much, and I've always been an avid reader. But no, and you know, when we talk about, you know, you're writing things down and you put all this out there, and, you know, it's just the good, the bad, and the ugly, and then later you go, oh, that was crazy what I wrote there, that's not quite right. Well, you know, the reality is, like, when you write, especially when you're writing emotionally, you know, and when you have so many things going on, trying to decipher reality from, you know, fiction, and here's what I'm being told in the media, and here's what I'm being told by these people, and then here's what the guys on the ground are now saying, and now here's my crazy interpretation of everything. And that's where having people outside the situation, like editors, come in really handy, right? Because they're coming in and they're the ones who are talented, right? So they're going, okay, listen, crazy, like, let's edit this way out, let's heavily edit that, and let's take like the good stuff and keep that and build on it. So you know, it's not like, oh, I was just such a talented writer and I was just waiting to. No, it was, you know, right place, right time, if you want to call it right. But, you know, like, it just, there was a story that needed to be told, and I was the person there who was willing to do it. And that's it, you know.
Now, your children, because you have two children, how do they feel about their mom writing a story about what happened?
From what I can tell, I'm going to add a little bit more light because it's really dark all of a sudden in my office.
That state lighting.
There we go. Yeah, ring light. It's, yeah, imagine it being dark in Washington. I don't think my kids care. My kids are like, wow, that's nice, Mom. I'm like, really? So, I mean, I can tell them anything cool I've done and they are not impressed. Yeah. So I don't know. I think one of them is very, very against social media, anything. So I can't, you know, which is good. So there are times where it's like, okay, I'm going to do this, and I run everything by him. I'm going to write this. Are you good with that? He wants to be left out as much as possible. So with the book, I had to kind of go over everything with them, and they okayed everything. But yeah, for the most part, they, you know, they don't care at all as long as I'm not mentioning them too much. So,
Well,
Yeah.
from an outsider's perspective, right? You involving them, especially through the process and your grieving process and everything, I think that it's fascinating to see a mother that involves her children when it comes to something like this. And maybe not now because they're still young, but I think that once they reach a certain age and they go through life and they experience life, if I was in your shoes, I would appreciate my mother writing something like this in order to tell the story of how things really happened. So, from an outsider's perspective, I commend you for doing this.
thank you. You know, I think something that gets missed a lot of times when a service member is killed, you know, the kids are like infantilized. It's to, you know what I mean? They are treated like babies. And then they're kind of just not forgotten, but, you know, we talk about how this is affecting the mom or how this is affecting the spouse. We don't talk about the dads, and we don't talk about the kids very much. But the reality is that when their dad dies, especially when they're the age my kids were, because they were 9 and 11, they were old enough to know exactly what had happened. So they lose that innocence and they lose that childhood. So all of a sudden, I've got kids who, I mean, they don't believe in Santa Claus anymore. They don't believe in the Easter Bunny. I mean, 9 years old, and my youngest is telling me, listen, a fat man in a suit is not coming down that chimney. Like, not going to happen. You know, he got this sweater that said, you know, Santa wanted for breaking and entering. And that's what he wore the next time he saw Santa. And I just couldn't stop the kid, you know? So that's, you know, they lose that innocence. They just do. And so at that point, the only way I'm going to get through everything that we're dealing with is just to be honest with them and to level with them at every turn, because they see it coming. Especially my kids they're smart kids. So, I mean, you mix the fact that they lost their innocence, they're bright kids. I tell them anything and they're like, they just call BS. And so it's not even worth trying to hide anything from them. I just have to give it to them as softly as I can, but this is what's going on. What's your take? You're not the end all, you don't get the final say, but you do get to, it's the three of us now. So we're the family.
Yeah, I definitely have to applaud you on teaching your kids how to do that, because that's exactly what you've been doing, is teaching them how to get through one of the hardest things that you could ever get through. So I definitely applaud you on that, and your style of leadership on that. That just tells me that you're one hell of a leader.
Yeah.
One hell of a leader. That's one thing that I picked up. Speaking of leader, what is your nonprofit going to be about?
So we're calling it Soldiers Alliance Foundation. We have a couple goals. We want to start with the kind of the nonprofit where we do good things. So we want to focus on children of the fallen. So we're going to start with a drive program where we work on covering teenagers, like their expenses for getting their driver's license. So we'll cover their driving school. That's one thing I learned is really expensive last year when my son started driving. So start with just a program to help cover those expenses, and hopefully down the road we can help them also with getting their first car, but we're going to start small. And then the other thing we want to do is we've talked about maybe looking at service animals for kids of the fallen. And that's not something people talk about a lot either. But when it came right down to it, I had to deal with kids who weren't sleeping through the night, 10, 11, wanting to climb in bed, and 12, and I just went, they're going into middle school. I can't have these boys still crawling into bed with me. So I looked at service dogs, and they are expensive. So it was one of those, hey, everybody, this is what I want to do for the kids. Who wants to help me afford this? So that it's expensive. And so what I found when I got them their dog finally is he could sleep on the floor with them. He had failed out of a seeing eye dog program, so we got him cheap. And he was great. We could take him anywhere with us. We started taking him to nonprofit events for Wear Blue, Run to Remember, which my boys are a part of. And I ran into other Gold Stars, but also I ran into a military spouse with a child in a wheelchair. And she goes, oh, we need a dog like this. How can you get one? And I told her, well, this is where I got him, but this was the cost. And she said she couldn't afford it either. And I thought, this is such a, why don't we have a program that covers kids, both military and, Gold Star, who actually need these animals? That's huge. So that's something I want to look into as well with the nonprofit. And then the flip side to the nonprofit, we want to start working to change the way military investigations are done. So that's the other side of it, is we want to start working on mostly just making it so that commands can't investigate themselves, essentially, which is what happened in Brian's instance with his team. And then kind of move forward in things like that. That'll help those serving to kind of change the archaic system that's kind of governed everything for years, for too long.
See, that's awesome. That sounds like a really amazing mission that you have going on, and we would love, as soon as you are ready, to start putting out information regarding all that. So let's see, what inspired you to start giving back? What was it that got you inspired to start doing that?
I'm going to turn on one more light because this is driving me crazy. I can see how dark my room is getting. There. I'm like, I forgot. I normally turn that light on and I forgot. So what inspired me to start giving back? Well, I think the thing is, when you leave the military, or when you're struggling to whether it's transition or really anything in life, I think we tend to become so focused on ourselves and introspective. And as we begin to do things for other people, it actually brings us a lot of healing, so in an effort to help other people, we actually help ourselves. So you could say it was selfish in the end. But I think also, watching what happened with Brian's team was the first time that being able to help them and see the long-term impacts on their lives from what I did for them. I mean, it made a huge impact on me, but it also made me want to do more for teams in the future that I couldn't help directly, right? Because I'm no longer involved. And so let's say another team goes through this same thing, then I want to see them have change already in place to help them, have someone they can reach out to and say, we need help. So I thought the perfect thing is a nonprofit where they can reach out and say, hey, we need help. And here's the problem.
After you got your retired ID and all that stuff, did you start going through the transition process? Was there any resources made available for you and your family? How did that work out?
So the day you lose your spouse, you pretty much start signing paperwork to leave the military, and you have to be off base within a year. So I think that's a really hard thing for a Gold Star spouse, is your husband serving, you're looking at, hey, this is what we're doing, this is where we're going to be for the next 10, 20 years. He gets killed and it's almost like not that you're excommunicated, but it almost feels like that. Like, okay, you've got a year, you've got to get off base and you've got to sign completely out. You've got all your paperwork and now you're going with your CAO if you're lucky. Being a Green Beret, Brian, we get the best CAOs. But basically they take you office to office to office to do all the paperwork your husband would have done to sign out of the Army. So now you're doing it. And so, yeah, almost instantly, that's what you do. It's what you do for the next several months, trying to get separated from the Army. Or military.
With that in mind, right? So first off, I want to emphasize that even though you feel that it was selfish in a roundabout way, I think it was more cathartic to try to do things to help others. Yes, it eventually helps you, but that's not your initial goal in mind, right? Your initial goal is to try to share and spread the love and get help for everyone else that is going through your thing or through your same suffering. Yes, it eventually helps you. You don't realize it most of the time. That's actually how this podcast was born, right? We did it because both Chris and I were suffering through what is called a med board, right? Neither one of us wanted to finish the military now. We wanted to be in the military longer. However, medically, we were not able to do it. And for Chris to be a senior chief, which is an E8, right? Me, an E7. And we've both have been in, he was in for 20 years. I've been in currently for 21. And I'm still not ready to get out, right? I can only imagine the pain and the suffering that very junior sailors or other service members, not to include families, that they go through. I have seen, and I have been a CACO, CACO, for many years, and I have seen families and part of the process, but from someone inside of the military, it's completely different than from someone that's actually living it, right? And I think that you have done such a great service to share this experience so that everyone else can learn from it. Not saying that you want this upon anybody, because I don't think anybody does. As you mentioned before, this is something that there's a possibility that can happen. Every single one of us service members that we join the military, we have that in mind, right? In the back of our minds, it's something that is always a possibility. And something obviously that we don't want for any of our family's members to experience or to go through. But now having someone that tells a story that the way that you are and sharing it, it brings light and awareness to where some of the things that are some of the room for growth that we can always improve on in our process, in any process, right? And with that being said, you have not only are you just doing this for you, or you have done this with you, but you've done it with your children, and you're doing a wonderful job raising your children. So again, I commend you for that. I as a single mother, I was raised by my mother, and she was a single mother. I know just how difficult that is. Now having to juggle all these other things is exponentially harder, right? And then having to deal with the process of losing your spouse and then leaving the military abruptly, it's even harder, right? And then you go in, from my perspective, you go into this fight or flight mode, and all you're trying to do is just survive, right? And do you feel like you've made it past that point, that you're past surviving? Are you living, or are you still in that cycle?
Yeah, I think, for the first time, I think it took about 5 years. I think most people think, oh, a year. And the truth is, the first year is fight or flight. You're just, really fighting. And you're thinking, oh, I'll hit that year mark and it'll be like nothing ever happened. And you hit that year mark, and the reality that it's never going to go back to normal makes it a lot worse. So the second year is worse. And I think the next few years is just you trying to figure out how to find peace and how to live again. And so, now it's been 6 years, and the last year was really the most normal year I've had, because you are finally, it's like you don't have those huge ups and downs, right? So every October would hit, which is when Brian was killed, and it's a physiological thing. So your brain, your body, everything remembers the change of the light, the smells in the air, and that's all related to that trauma. And so the minute that month hits, it was just like a torrential, it was like a tsunami hitting all over again. And you didn't expect it, and it would hit all at once, and then your whole life would just wash out for a few weeks. And that's just not it's not the case anymore. But yes, it took a long time. It took a very long time. And I think the reason it's not always 5 years, I think it depends on the choices you make in the interim. So as a widow, especially those first 3 years, sometimes you're just looking for something to grab onto to keep you from drowning. And sometimes that can be a bad relationship, that can be bad choices with bad financial choices, or moving somewhere that's, you know what I mean, and you get yourself into these situations, and then that just adds on to the timeline of how long it's going to take you to recover and rebuild. And fortunately, I had Brian's family. They were helping me make good choices. I didn't do anything totally stupid, which is a miracle. And, made some very good choices, fortunately, and so when I see widows in that state, and I guess widowers too, who haven't made any major life altering changes in the initial years right after, they tend to fare well, much better down the line. So
we're big advocates on mental health. And for someone transitioning from as a spouse and as your children, how did mental health play a role into how you had to take care of your family and yourself? And did you reach out to any organizations? Were there any organizations that were helpful, or what was your process?
I think I was so caught up in the story and just the craziness of everything going on, and I was trying to hide out because everything was so for me it was different. Well, a lot of military spouses, it'll be the same because there's so much political, and a lot of things are politicized, and also if it ends up on the news, you feel like you're under a magnifying glass, so all you're trying to do is hide. So I didn't seek help. I did initially. The kids and I went to the VA, but then when things got crazy, they were having trouble fitting us in. We could never make it. And I think the final straw was when my son saw the head cam video of his dad's death, and he was on the autism spectrum. And I just went, we're done. No one else is going to help us. And we're just going to hide out and do this our way. And so that's what we did. We just kind of, hung out with the family, talked with the family. And the problem is that we are automatically put on the VA system, which means then we're competing with veterans for the same mental health care, which honestly, none of the widows feel okay with at all. And it's a fight anyway. It's enough of a fight for you guys to get on there, and it's an even bigger fight for us to get on there. And we don't feel right about taking a veteran's place, in that line. So, yeah, it's just, it's, so I've heard there are some nonprofits that will cover mental health care. I'm not sure who does right now. I know that Tunnels to Towers is a great organization, and I've heard that they're starting to do mental health care, add that in as one of their options for spouses who have lost someone in either in the line of duty, whether that's fire, police, or military. So I think that's great. I don't know how far into it they are yet, but I think that's fantastic. So I don't know which other organizations out there do that, but that's, but we haven't done any of that, unfortunately. I would like that.
It'd be nice to see if the VA system could just start acting as a secondary insurance to your primary, because I assume you had TRICARE.
We did. We had TRICARE, and we stay with TRICARE, and then at a certain, I think it was 3 years, I have to switch and I have to start paying. The kids are still on TRICARE, or I can do what is it? There's a couple other options I can do. I don't know.
Yeah, but at least that way, like, I mean, for the retirees or anybody that gets TRICARE, like if they would just set it up like that, then you guys could get your care taken a lot sooner. And I know the mental health game is kind of hard anyways. Most people do not find their first person that they go see is the right person for them. I've been to one before, and I just walked right out. My wife and I, we went to it, and we walked in there, and she said some stuff, and we looked at each other like, nah, we're good. So it's kind of funny, frustrating, irritating, the amount of work that you have to do just to go get mental help, it's really frustrating. So I think that your father-in-law sounds like one of the most solid dudes out there, and it sounds like he kind of really helped you guys get on your way.
Yeah, him and my mother-in-law were just huge. The two of them just, I mean, every step along the way, from the very beginning, my father-in-law helping me just with figuring out what happened, knowing the right questions to ask, where to go to, find answers for different things, just everything, having been a Marine officer for years. And then my mother-in-law, just being here for the kids, because she had such a great relationship with my kids before Brian passed away. And so that stayed the same. And she's a middle school teacher, so she was great with the kids, always helping them with homework. When COVID happened and I was writing the book, she took over with schooling them. So she's, the two of them have been just remarkable. And now when I travel for different things, whether it's speaking or book stuff, whatever, yeah, they take over with the kids. So it's pretty incredible. I've been really fortunate.
What advice would you give to spouses as they're getting married and joining the military family?
The number one thing Brian and I did absolutely right, and I thought it was stupid at the time, it was just a requirement of his unit, was to write a will and write down everything he wanted from the stupid songs, which the songs we couldn't use because the ones he put down were horrible, but for a burial. Where did he want to be buried and what songs did he want? He put Finnegan's Wake. And if you know what Finnegan's Wake is, it's not what you play when you bury someone. It means someone comes back to life and starts dancing around on their own grave. That's what he wanted. But yeah, it wasn't funny the day of. So I was like, no, I don't care what he wanted. But, those things that I thought were so horrible, like, stupid, like, come on, because you're infallible when you're in your 20s and 30s, right? But you're not. And so when he died, I was so grateful that I didn't have to worry about doing something the wrong way, and it didn't turn into a fight between me and his parents, because it was written down. Not that we would have fought, but some in-laws and daughter-in-laws do. Fortunately, we get along pretty well, but they're nice to me. They give me my way if I throw a fit, but it's usually me who throws the fit. I'm the difficult one. But Brian had it written, I want to be buried in Arlington. I want these songs played. I want this and that. So even though that's Arlington way out in, the other side of the country on the East Coast, it wasn't his parents saying, well, we want him in Washington State. And then me saying, well, no, I want him, here. And so it was easy. It's like, well, that's where he wanted to be. So that's where we're putting him. And the will, so where the property and the kids and the money, where it's all going, there is no question. It's all handled ahead of time. And it made such a big difference. So everyone I talk to, even, my sister, my brother, get wills, get everything laid out, not because you are going to die, but you're going to die one day. So you might as well do it, So.
Now with that, so you have the will aspect of things. Would there be any other advice that you think could help through a process like this?
That would help, like, going through a process like this? I think it's funny, you don't expect it, but the most valuable thing was finding other widows. And I think it's similar to when you guys deploy and you experience, combat, you come home and no one can understand you or talk to you the way someone who has gone through it can. And so there was something about meeting other widows that it just changed the level and the depth of the conversation and the amount of healing I got from it and the amount of healing they were getting from it. And so that would be my advice is, if this ever happens to you, make sure you automatically go and meet other widows, take part in these conferences, just connect, because that's going to save your life,
And what was your process in order to reach out or to connect?
There's a soldiers, survivor outreach services on most bases, SOS. And I honestly, I just stumbled on a program one day. They had like a group therapy session. And so it's ironic, they can't actually hold the group therapy sessions or meetings for spouses. Like they can't have a spousal support program on base unless there is a counselor present. And they're shorthanded counselors, obviously. And so what we had to do at Fort Bragg was have a counselor volunteer to come in when she could, which was like the first Thursday of every month. And when you've just gone through loss, you can't remember what day of the week it is. So I didn't go. Fortunately, I stumbled on it one day on accident and ran into another spouse. And that was the first time I realized how invaluable that was. So when I moved out to Washington State at JBLM, I just started my own group and just told the lady, like, this isn't a counseling, this is just like Gold Star widow group. And so she goes, okay, that works. So as long as it's not the SOS putting it on, we could do it. And so it just turned into making the group on Facebook and starting to invite other Gold Star widows from around the state. And whoever could show up would show up. And we ended up with a group of like 20, I think, right? And it was right before COVID hit. So that's how we made it happen.
Yeah.
Did you transition to virtual after COVID? Is there something like that now?
No, we didn't. We actually were just talking about it this morning, me and a couple of the girls, about starting it back up. So we'll see. Yeah, it's been hard to get people to go again, but maybe so.
It's funny how you talk about how you found others like you. Also on transitioning, we kind of start doing the same thing. We start talking to those that have already gone through it before, that really kind of get shared experience. And this was kind of our experiment. This show here was to kind of shortcut that. You could find people, give their experiences, and really kind of get like a master level education on transitioning while you're going through your process. So it's really cool that you formed a group like that. Did you guys have like a special name for it? I didn't catch one.
No, we actually we started doing it out of the JBLM SOS office. I think on Facebook, we named it like PNW Military Widow and Widowers. And then people could come in, request to join, and then they could see if we were like, hey, we're going to meet down at this place this week, or we'll be on base this week. So that's kind of what we started doing. But I was facilitating the majority of stuff. And so between COVID and then my book releasing, I just plain ran out of time, and no one else picked up. So, but the nice thing was a lot of us had lost our spouses all around between October 2017 and 2020. And so we all just met during that time and then have stayed close. Yeah. But I think you're right. Like there's a lot of things when you're transitioning out and as a widow, where there's a lot of things where we have all these questions and we don't know how to get them answered, whether it's forms or just different processes. It's so complicated sometimes, or which organization can I reach out to for this, or what's this look at like at 5 years out, 10 years out, and so having older widows come in and sit with us also is very helpful, because what have you done with your kids between this time, and what does that look like long term? And yeah, so a lot of those questions, it's sped up a lot of that, and now everybody's got contacts where we can reach out and say, hey, answer this for this person. And yeah, it's nice.
Was there kind of like a checklist or processes or steps that you guys created to help each other out?
We didn't. When you say cross, like checklist or whatever, I was thinking about, so there's this thing that we joke about called, I don't think I have it in here right now, we call it the Big Book of Death. It's called, oh gosh, okay, I gotta show you.
I'm sorry, Michelle, you threw me for a loop.
You'll understand when I show this to you. Okay. It's the big book of death.
The hell is that?
It is the days ahead. So when someone dies in the military, they give you this to go through to get out of the military. And so we had to go through that every day in the year after our husbands died and check everything off the list. So that's the big book of death, and it's a nightmare. But that's where you keep all your paperwork and all your stuff and go through your checklists and yeah, so that's something we would joke about, but then we'd say, okay, you know, we saw all this, but the reality is what's important in that big book. What do we actually need to know? You know, when, like, what do the benefits look like? If you get remarried, what happens? That's a huge question. What if you are just dating someone and you start living with them, but you're not married yet? Like, will you get in trouble? Like, just, I mean, there's, yeah, a lot of questions like that, because if you get remarried, you know, as if you're married in the military, you know, you pay into survivor benefits. Well, if I get remarried before 56, all the survivor benefits that Brian paid into disappear. So unless I'm over 50, it doesn't matter how many years he paid in or whatever, like that just goes away. So then you have to decide, he died serving his country and he paid into this for me. But yeah, so it's this weird thing. And so if I get caught dating again or whatever, does that mean that I get, you know, I lose what Brian earned? And then if I break up with them, then, or I get a divorce, then can I get those back, or are those gone forever? So there's a lot of questions like that as well. So yeah, we all sit around and have these conversations and try and figure out the answers and connect with, you know, which organizations are trying to change those laws right now. So yeah, it's a good little network of women where we all talk about this and try and figure out which things to get behind. You find that a lot of the widows become activists to a certain extent, you know, trying to get involved in organizations and supporting them and then going back to school to get degrees that will help them make political changes or policy changes.
That's really infuriating to know that all the, you know, 6% of my retirement check, and we do pay into that while we're in the military too. And just to know that my wife, you know, she decides to remarry, the money that I have set aside, not just for my wife, but also my children too.
Yeah.
You know, that it's gone. That's ridiculous. I don't know. That would be a good thing to see change in the correct way. Definitely really infuriating. I just got like really upset when I heard you say that.
Yeah, you figure Brian died at 35 and now we're 6 years later. And so it's like, well, you know, would he want me to be single and alone and doing this forever with the kids? And would he want me to be happy? I know how I'd feel if I had died. I'd want him to like find somebody as soon as possible, like be happy. And because companionship is huge, you know? And so for me, I'm like, that's not a fair thing to put on a person, you know, is, well, you don't get to see what your husband paid into. Like, we're gonna make that a punishment for you getting remarried, you know? And so it's something else. It's really interesting.
So Michelle, how can Return to Roots help you and your mission and your vision?
Gosh, I guess I always say buy the book. Just so you know the story. And so yeah, you know, the guys, most people, when they start reading it, they realize they do know the story, but they know a different version of it. And in this version that they know, the team members, who I adore, are really bad guys. They were a bunch of cowboys who went rogue and chased down terrorists and got their teammates killed. And that's not what happened at all. So I always tell people that my ultimate mission when I started this book, when Brian died and everything happened, was to prove that the team was innocent. Everyone on the team, including my husband, they were heroes, and I was going to set the record straight. So that's my ultimate goal. And then also, you know, as I move along, I would love to have support with the nonprofit, obviously, Soldiers Alliance Foundation, as we work towards supporting, you know, soldiers in the future.
All right. You guys want to move to the final rounds? Save rounds and alibi? All right, cool. So let's go to our first question. What kind of content do you recommend our listeners out there to start digesting while they're in a transition?
There's a great book I read the other day by a guy named Ben Sledge, and it's called Where Cowards Go to Die. It's a great book when he talks about everything from going through war to transitioning out and what that looked like. I think for women too, who are married to men who are serving, it's a good way to get a view of what exactly, you know, PTSD, we say it, we talk about it. A lot of wives don't understand it. I know I had no clue before Brian died. And then afterwards learning, yeah, fantastic book. You guys are going to love it. And then, gosh, what's another good one? There's so many good books. I read a ton. That's probably my favorite one right now. So that's a great transition book, because he does talk about being in, serving, and like the before versus the after, and what that looked like PTSD wise, and how that affected his relationship. And so I think, especially, I think for guys, they'll really like it. And I think for spouses, it'll help them understand what their husband's going through, and it'll help make sense of the changes they're seeing. So
We kind of touched on this a little bit. And when you talked about the will, aside from making the will and being prepared that way, is there any other advice you can give to any spouse or family member in preparation as they join the military family to assist with the aftermath, as you mentioned, essentially the fight or flight response that goes through years, to be able to prepare to ease the process and make it better for both the spouse and the family?
that's a really tricky question. I think, you know, it's hard, because I think we're all naturally someone who, in the beginning, we know exactly what we are. There's certain people that are naturally fighters and are naturally, you know, fleers. I know I was always more like, I'll flee, thank you. And, you know, when it comes right down to it, you know, with what happened to Brian, I definitely fought, but it was hard to transition from fight and not go back towards flight, right? But learn to settle in the middle, where I'm not going to get into a fight, but I'm going to breathe through this, and I'm going to just, you know, let things go. And I think a lot of times too, because, you know, when we talk PTSD, when Brian died was the first time I realized what he was going through, and I could actually relate to him more than I could relate to who I was before. And at that point was the first time I also began to relate more to the men on his team than their spouses. And it's because I had been affected by war, actually been affected. And there was real rage coming out of the military and transitioning into the civilian world. and having civilians say things to me. And I'm sure I said things like this to Brian that were just flippant. But he had seen real savagery. He had seen friends die. And he understood the real cost. So for me to, say things flippantly and have him react the way he would, I didn't understand it before. And when I was trying to transition out and I would be, anywhere. I mean, geez, I remember shopping one day and this girl holding up a shirt and being, saying something to the extent of like, a t-shirt a day keeps the sadness away or something. And I just wanted to absolutely kill her because I thought a t-shirt makes you happy. Like I just, because I would have given up my entire, I thought I would give up everything on that I own, everything I have, and walk naked through the streets of glass just to see Brian for 5 minutes, just once. And Americans are happy with a shirt to take a little bit of depression away. Like I couldn't do it. And so having to learn to not fight in those moments, and just accept that it's okay. This is why our men and women fight, is so that civilians don't have to know what savagery and ugliness the rest of the world faces. And because that's what I want my kids to have.
After you got the idea of writing the book and chronicling everything, what got you into the correct mindset to get to that point? Like what was it that provoked that mindset of, you know what, it happened and I'm gonna make something out of this?
So after the book or before the book?
Kind of like after you got the idea of like, hey, maybe I should write a book about it. What got you like in that mindset? I'm doing it.
I had a few people, actually, initially there was a guy at the New York Times who called me because he wanted a story. And then he basically told me, you're the one who should write this. And something about that made me think, you know what, maybe I actually can, and maybe I actually should. And then realizing a lot of anger over what I saw the media reporting versus what was reality. And I realized that when everything happened, they were now, after they trashed this team, they were going to come back and try and get the story from the team and use them. That there was that. And I think that happened. And then I think the final straw was the brief, when it went from just the media to now I watched the military, AFRICOM, the highest military leaders who are running the investigation, and I talk about this in the book, but they were doing a media brief and they stated that while all teams on the continent were performing optimally, my husband's team was not indicative of what special operators do. And in that moment, I realized they were willing to not just insult and dishonor all of the men who had fought beside my husband, but those also who had died. And someone who is a 4-star general and has the world at his fingertips to completely dishonor a man who had simply followed orders and given his life to save his brothers, should not be in that position any longer, but they also shouldn't be allowed to just walk away from a comment like that and not have some sort of backlash. And so I was going to do everything in my power to make sure as many people saw the truth of it and saw his responsibility as I could. That was when I decided.
What was it that you kind of alluded to? It took 5 years for you to fill whatever normal can be. But what was it that made you find your purpose?
I think what helped me find my purpose, I don't know. I think you have to kind of I've said before, like serving and helping others, because you've got to take that focus off yourself. The more you focus on yourself, the more down the rabbit hole and sorry for yourself you feel. And you can never see yourself as a victim. The only victim is the person who died. And after that, the rest of the choices, you're choosing to be a victim and make more victims of the terrorists. And, we can't do that.
Michelle, I would like to thank you for coming onto our podcast, sharing your story, sharing your book, and most of all, sharing your experience for posterity and for willingness to help other service members and other families transition. Again, I can't say this enough. Any single mother has a special place in my heart, and lots and lots of respect. Any single parent, not just a single mother. A Gold Star recipient that had to go through this and all the struggles and everything, and now being able to share your story with us and with our audience and with the world, it's extremely courageous, and we appreciate you for sharing and being vulnerable. And I know you've had already one book tour. Is there a plan to have another book tour?
I would love that. I just don't know if I can afford it. But I do love getting out and seeing everybody, and yeah, it's fun.
Well, without holding you back, thank you, Michelle. And how can our audience get a hold of you?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been great. You can get a hold of me. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, whatever you like. Facebook, author Michelle Black. Instagram, I am Michelle Black 71. And those are the main places where I do things. You can find me on Twitter, but you won't see much from me. I'm not great on there. So, and if I could mention a few of my favorite organizations, I love Wear Blue, Run to Remember, and they're based out of Washington State. So especially love Wear Blue, and my kids participate in that. It's really a great organization for kids. Gold Star Teen Adventures is another amazing nonprofit that does they take boys on hunts, girls too. They take them to learn how to scuba dive during the summers and teach them to teach them outdoor survival skills. It's an amazing group of things you can send your kids to during the summer. Also, TAPS is fantastic, and Gary Sinise Foundation I absolutely love, and Tunnels to Towers is one of my absolute favorites. So those are just some of my top picks. I could go on for hours because there's a lot of really good organizations out there, but those are some of my favorites. And Got Your Six Fishing as well. It's a great one, great outdoor one, based out of, I think they're out of Washington. I know they do some great fishing. So.
Well, Michelle, thank you. And to our listeners, you got Michelle, Gold Star wife, who wrote Sacrifice, chronicling her experiences and not only hers, but her husband's and team member. And she's just got a wealth of knowledge as far as how to become something even greater. And it was an honor to be able to spend some time with her. So I hope you guys share some love towards her. Download her book, read it, digest it, share it with others. To everybody that's out there, it's not all rainbows and unicorn. It's your transition. Take charge of it. Mil2Vet out.